How does God communicate his thoughts to us? He doesn't communicate to me through an occasional warm fuzzy or butterflies in my belly. He communicates his thoughts through several different ways. The Bible, sometimes dreams, visions, nature, conviction, hearing someone preach, reading a Christian book, but music, as we heard this morning. But all of those communications are funneled through and processed through one place, and that is my mind. That is my brain. I'm grateful to Tim Poyer for sending me a perfect quote for what I am communicating here. This is from a book called Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2, and Ellen White wrote this. She said, the brain nerves which communicate with the entire system are the only medium through which heaven can communicate to man and affect his inmost life. The only medium by which God can communicate to us and affect our inmost life. I want God to direct my life. I want God to direct your life. I don't want any area of my life untouched by God. Even those things that only God and I know about, that maybe my wife and my kids don't even know about, only those deep recesses that only God and I know about, those deep down parts. I want God to even seep down into those parts and communicate with me. And I'm told that this is only done through the process of speaking in my brain, those thoughts of God. That is why it is vital. If I want to understand these thoughts and hear these thoughts and measure the vast sum of these thoughts, that is why it is vital for me to have, as Dr. Wendy Suzuki said, a big, fat, fluffy brain. But unfortunately, folks, just as there are things that we can do to help us grow a big, fat, fluffy brain for Jesus, there are also things that we do, or that we may be tempted to do, that are taking away from that big, fat, fluffy brain for Jesus. So today I want to share with you 4 things that we might be doing that are damaging the only medium by which heaven allows us to hear from God. But before I share these 4 things, I want to acknowledge something. I want to acknowledge first this, that human nature is such that it is always easier to hear an idea that I am not doing, something out there, and to say, oh yeah, I'm going to give that a try. It's always easier to see something out there and say, you know what, I might try that, than it is to be told that something that we are doing might be something that we need to step away from. That's harder. That's harder in human nature, to hear about something and someone says, you know what, maybe this isn't the best thing for you. In fact, we live in a world now where we're really a group of folk that don't like to say, yeah, we probably shouldn't do that. We live in more of a world where it's like, well, to each their own, and let it be. I was listening to a podcast. On this podcast, the guest, a neuroscientist, was saying that there is a current societal activity. I won't tell you what that current societal activity is right at the moment, but was saying that there's a current societal activity that is one of the most damaging things they've ever seen affecting the human brain in history. And she was describing this thing, and she said, this activity, she said, is like being confronted with a predator multiple times a day. She said it would be like walking through the African wilderness and suddenly coming face to face with a roaring lion. She said when that happens, the brain has a chemical that is released that causes us to either fight or flight. And this is something that God built into us. This is something that protects us, this fight or flight mechanism. This is something that we need and that we want in our lives. But she said, this is supposed to be something that's used rarely. And yet this activity in society is causing that fight or flight response to occur dozens and dozens and dozens of times throughout the day. And it's damaging, she said, our brains, especially the brains of our young people. Then the podcaster asked the doctor, well, what should we do about such a brain destroyer? I was running. I turned up the volume, kind of leaned into my run to hear what she was saying. What is she going to say? And here's what she said. She said, be aware that it damages your brain, and maybe practice some breathing exercises to help counteract the damage. Maybe try this, maybe try that. It was sad to me that she didn't say, and maybe here's the best option of all. Just quit. Just quit. You see, logically, if I lived in the African wilderness, which my wife did for a year, by the way, if I lived in the African wilderness and there was a path that I had to trod on a regular basis for my work to go here and there, and this path, every time I walked this path, I was guaranteed to run into a roaring lion that might devour me. And if I knew that I was going to run into that roaring lion and might devour me, and not only did I know that, but I knew that even if I saw that lion, that it would trigger something in my brain that if triggered enough times would begin to damage my brain, what would I do? Especially if I knew that there was another path that if I walk that path, I'll never run into that lion ever. I would choose the path that never runs into the lion, right? And all of you would say, duh. That's just called smarts. And yet, we continue to walk down some paths that are damaging. So in this message, I want to challenge us to think about all the things I share with you today in that context. In that context. If there's a path that we know is beginning to damage our brains, the only medium by which God communicates from heaven to us, and there's a path that is not damaging our brains, then which one do we want to choose? Now, I gave you 4 positive things last week because they all have a correlation to some of these things I'm going to say maybe we should think about removing. Because it's easy to say, okay, just take that away, but we need to put something better into that or something else into that space. And so we started with the positive last week, those things, but they correlate to the 4 things we're taking away this week. Now I want to share with you one more quote from that quote that Tim Poyer shared with me. He says this, or she said this, whatever disturbs the circulation of the electric currents in the nervous system lessens the strength of the vital powers, and the result is a deadening of the sensibilities of the mind. I want a big, fat, fluffy brain for Jesus. Not one that has lost power, not one that is less vital, not one that is deadened. And with that, the first thing that I want you to consider that is damaging for our brains, and hold on to it, as we are adding to our minds more and more Bible study and prayer, we need to be taking steps to end our personal social media consumption. We need to be taking steps to end our social media consumption. Hear me out. The doctor in the podcast that was talking about the thing that they've seen that is the most damaging to the brain of anything else they've observed in history is social media. Dr. Suzuki, who teaches about the importance of a big, fluffy brain, she compares social media to being confronted by a predator or being pursued by a hungry lion. And she wouldn't say it, but I will. Are we okay with sticking something that is killing our brains? That is killing our brains and damaging the one avenue by which God communicates to us. Now, someone could say, well, I hear you, Pastor, but I and none of my kids see anything negative or bad on any social media. And if that's true, then there's a lot of parents that want to talk to you. You're a miracle worker if you've actually found that social media place out. But here's the thing about social media. The way that it is designed, it's designed that even the good damages your brain. That even the good damages your brain. A study from Santa Clara University. Social media activates the human body's fight or flight limbic system with the alerting of new messages. The constant alert of new messages and updates on social media activates the human body's fight or flight limbic system in a way that resembles, these are their words from their study, in a way that resembles being on alert for predators. The study doesn't say that the alerts are from bad people or bad things. They might all be positive and kind words and words of affirmation, but just the alert of the new message they said triggers the same thing in your brain as when you see a lion or some predator on the street. The positive thing. And that alert over and over, dozens of times a day going off, signaling to you, is doing damage to your brain. When I used to be on social media, I had Facebook. And I was on Facebook, and I am not a person that cares at all about birthdays. I'm just not. My mom once called me and said, "Hey, Chad, I am so sorry. I forgot your birthday." And I said, "When was my birthday?" I'd completely forgotten. I didn't realize it. I love telling that story because my wife always said, "I cannot believe your mom forgot your birthday." My wife loves everything about my mom except for that one thing. But we're not birthday people. In fact, thank you, Merle. Where's Merle? Thank you, Merle, for telling us it was Father's Day. I completely forgot that tomorrow is Father's Day. I don't remember this thing, so happy Father's Day, fathers. So I'm not big, but you know what? Every year at my birthday, I read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of messages saying, "Happy birthday, Chad. Happy birthday, Chad." Because I just kept getting alerts that people were wishing me happy birthday on my birthday. And suddenly this day that meant nothing to me meant all kinds of things to me on that one day. Now, if you're a birthday person, I don't judge you at all. My wife loves birthdays. Good on you. But my point is those are good messages, but that little trigger, even those just the alerts are triggering that same response. People say, "Man, but if I go off of that, I'll feel isolated, or my kids will feel isolated." You're right. Right at first you will. Because when I quit social media about 4 years ago, I felt isolated. I had FOMO, fear of missing out. But let me tell you what this is. As someone who has overcome other addictions in my life, it's like withdrawal. I've had withdrawal from other things, and I've found that if you stick with it by the power of God, you are able to get through that withdrawal. And then on social media side, the thing that you begin to seek out is face-to-face relationships, which actually helps your brain to become bigger and fatter and fluffier. It is possible to quit social media. And by the way, it is possible for your kids to not have social media. My kids don't have any social media accounts. And they're okay. They're a little bit annoyed with me from time to time about not having those accounts, but they're okay. This is something we need to think about. Number 2, last week, I told you exercise helps us grow big, fat, fluffy brains. The opposite of exercise is being sedentary. Now let me qualify this real quick, because there are people that I know, and there are people even in this community of faith that we live in, there are people that by no choice of their own, by no decision of their own, are sedentary. They literally, physically are unable to be active. I believe that we serve a big enough God to understand what we can and can't do. A God who understands the situations of our lives and understands that there are things that have happened to us that are not a choice of our own. And I understand that we serve a big enough God who is able to say, this is the sinful attack of Satan, and I am bridging that gap. But for those of us that have a choice, I believe that we will be allowed to experience the consequences of the choice not to act in the way that God designed us to act. If we choose to not be active, to live a life of inactivity, we will suffer those consequences. When I was reading, I found it interesting that exercise, as all studies kind of tend to show, exercise can thin our bodies somewhat. But not exercising thins our brains. Exercising makes our brains fatter and our bodies get a little bit smaller. Not exercising makes our bodies maybe get a little bit bigger, but our brains actually get thinner. And thinning of the brain is never a good thing. The body thinning in the right way at the right time can be healthy, but brain thinning never is. The thinning of the brain increases the risk of neurodeficits impacting memory. So we need to sit less and move more. Even if your moving is not an exercise, one of the studies I read that was interesting is that just standing on your feet more during the day actually helps your brain. So if you can just stand up at your desk, if you got one of those stand-up desks and you can stand up, even that alone right there can increase and strengthen your brain. So sit less and move more. Basically, I'm saying the same thing that I said last week on that one, but I want to just reinforce it. The third thing that we need to stop, we need to move away from, is going to bed with our phones or some other screen. With our phones or some other screen. When we go to bed with our phones, now, of course, the most dangerous things when we go to bed is looking at the social media or those shorts, those video shorts on YouTube. But watching anything can be a danger. For you, it may be a show. You know what I struggle with in this? Is I'm a Los Angeles Dodgers baseball fan. Do you know where the Los Angeles Dodgers are? I just told you. They're in Los Angeles. Do you know where 81 of their games are guaranteed to almost start at 10 o'clock at night? So I go, I'm just going to watch a few minutes of this game. And Christina says, turn down the brightness. It's too bright. So I turn down the brightness and I'm watching the Dodgers. Luckily they win a lot, so I'm watching them. But then I fall asleep and I wake up because someone's shouting, some home run's been hit or someone's been struck out or something's happened. And I wake up and, oh man, I fell asleep with my phone. I think, oh, no big deal. And I just put it back. But Harvard Medical School has done studies and falling asleep with any screen is not healthy. Going to bed with any screen is not healthy. In fact, even reading ebooks is less quality than reading a real book. They said those who read ebooks versus a real book before going to bed need an additional 10 minutes to fall asleep. They experienced 90 minutes of delayed melatonin onset and had half the amount of melatonin release. They also had diminished rapid eye movement sleep. That's why the National Sleep Foundation recommends turning off all devices at least an hour prior to bedtime. Will you pray for this for me? This is my struggle. I told you last week that my sleep was my struggle. This is my struggle. Pray for me. And maybe the Dodgers can move back to Brooklyn and they can be in the East Coast and I can watch them there. Pray for me on this. There's a correlation between all the things. And finally, the last thing, and it may induce a bit of a groan like the cold showers did last week. But the last thing that we should analyze in our lives. And by the way, last week, one of the reasons why I encourage you to end every shower with a cold shower is because it produces in you a natural, a healthy adrenaline. And that natural, healthy adrenaline wakes you up and gets you going in the morning and gets you started and gets you active for the day. But most of us are relying on something else to get us going and started and active in the day. So please don't shoot the messenger. But think about your coffee. Think about your coffee. I'm glad Anthony said preach it, because some of you are looking at me a little bit like you want me to stop preaching it right now. A study, Anthony and Deborah, from South Australia University, the largest study of its kind, over 20,000 people studied, states that high coffee consumption, and yes, it does say high coffee consumption, but I'm going to get to that in a moment, is associated with smaller total brain volume and increased risk of dementia. Remember, our sermon is about having a big, fat, fluffy brain for Jesus, and that we want this because we want to know the thoughts of our God, the vast and the numerous sums of the thoughts for our God. But overconsumption of caffeinated coffee or caffeinated energy drinks or caffeinated soda will, in the end, shrink our brains. From the University of Basel in Switzerland, in a study of a group of 20 healthy young adults, all of whom drink coffee every day, they were given tablets to take over 2 10-day periods and were asked not to consume any other caffeine during this time. During one study period, they received tablets with caffeine. That caffeine was equal to 1 cup of coffee. They were given tablets with caffeine. The other 10 days, they were given a tablet with no active ingredient. It was a placebo. At the end of each 10-day period, the researchers examined the volume of the subject's gray matter by means of brain scans, and the researchers saw, this is their word, significant difference in the gray matter where that was related to whether the subject had received caffeine or the placebo. After 10 days of placebo, in other words, caffeine abstinence, the volume of gray matter was greater than following the same period of time with caffeine capsules, just equaling 1 cup of coffee a day. The difference in the volume of gray matter was particularly striking, they said, in the right medial temporal lobe, including the hippocampus, a region of the brain that is essential to memory consolidation. Although caffeine appears to reduce, continuing study, the volume of gray matter, here's the good news. After just 10 days of coffee abstinence, the size of the brain had significantly regenerated in the test subjects. So don't lose heart if you've been drinking coffee forever. Hey, your brain can regenerate like that. Maybe Ellen White had something when she said coffee benumbs the brain. Now let me make one point here on this, because this is a sensitive subject for some of you. In fact, some of you were really nodding your head yes when I was talking about get off of social media. You were like, yeah. And then I said coffee, and some of you were like, hey. Pastor, watch it. You were meddling with my neighbor there, which is perfectly okay to do. But now you're meddling with me, Pastor, and I gotta shut this down. Let me make this point. I don't think we should consume caffeine as a regular part of our diet. For most of my life, I did until 5 years ago when I stopped. I think science shows it damages our brains. I think we should want the biggest and fattest and fluffiest brains possible, because the Holy Spirit, John chapter 15 and verse 26, speaks to our brains to teach us about Jesus, who is everything. And I want to know everything about Jesus. But I've received some very wise counsel. That I should not actually tell you, or let me say this, that I should not actually demand or say, this is exactly what you can eat or can't eat, or this is exactly what you should drink or shouldn't drink. That's a decision between you and God. And I get this counsel from a book that I'm almost done with that I read this past spring called The Ministry of Healing. And she writes this: there is real common sense in dietetic reform. The subject should be studied broadly and deeply. And no one should criticize others because their practice is not in all things in harmony with his, or I would say her own. It is impossible to make an unvarying rule to regulate everyone's habits. And no one should think of himself as the criterion for all. That's some good counsel. And so here's what I'm asking you on all these points, but particularly on this last one. I'm asking you to consider this counsel. Carefully consider your diet. Study from cause to effect, and cultivate self-control. Here is our ultimate goal: to have a big, fat, fluffy brain for Jesus. We should desire this, not because this saves us. You are saved by grace through faith and not by works, so that no man could boast. But then the very next text, by the way, says, so that you might do good works, which you were created to do. So I'm saved by grace through faith, but then because I'm saved, I go, Jesus, how can I live my best life for you? And so, Jesus, I know that you communicate through the avenues of my mind. You are my creator, and you are my redeemer, and you are my intercessor, and you are my best friend. And so I want all the thoughts that are in you to come into my brain. And I want to follow you. There was a time when Adventists were known to be people that didn't just address theological ideas, but we were a people that addressed physical ideas, and a people that addressed ideas related to our minds, because we are not just spirit, we are not just body, we are not just mind. We are whole beings created in the image of God. We are truly fearfully and wonderfully made. And because our designer designed us the way he did, and because we want to follow him in all of his ways, I pray that we will study carefully, we will examine from cause to effect, and we will allow Jesus to cultivate self-control in our lives so that we might have big, fat, fluffy brains for the glory of Jesus. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, hit the like button here. Subscribe to our page for future videos, or for the next video, click the box right here.